We just wrapped our first commercial project shot on the new Blackmagic Pyxis 6K. In this video, I'm gonna tell you why I was wrong about the Blackmagic Pyxis 6K. This camera got a lot of hype when it first was announced, a lot of good hype, a lot of bad hype, and honestly, I kind of jumped in on the critic train, talking about how it didn't have the greatest dynamic range, and what about the rolling shutter, and why didn't they give us a flip out screen? Over the next few months, as people released videos and I got to see test footage and I looked at the actual facts of the matter, I started to change my mind and I decided to give it a try. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name's Austin. I help run a video production company based out of Omaha, Nebraska called Glory Visuals, and we specialize in corporate and commercial video production. And before I get into why I was wrong about this camera, I feel like I need to set the stage a little bit to give context to where we're at as a company. For the past 7 years, we've been exclusively a Sony shop. We started off with an a7S II, eventually upgraded to the a7 III, and then to the FX3, and now we have an FX6 and an FX3 and an a7 IV, and we've pretty much used all of their models since then at some point or another. And we absolutely love our Sony cameras. They're a great blend of all of the different aspects of performance, from rolling shutter to low light performance to resolution to dynamic range to audio inputs. There are cameras out there with better resolution. There are cameras out there with better dynamic range. There are cameras out there with better audio inputs, or maybe just even audio inputs on the body itself instead of in a dumb XLR top handle. There are cameras out there that do each of these things a little bit better than the Sony FX6, but they don't do all of them better. And honestly, there's only one real area that caused me to look outside of the Sony ecosystem. Can you guess what it is? Last year, we invested in the Blazar Remus lens set, and it's our first step into anamorphic cinematography. We've used the Sirui lenses before on a couple projects. This is the first time we've owned a set of anamorphics. Cinema lenses in general are getting cheaper, they're getting more accessible, and gone are the days when you have to be a Hollywood filmmaker with a multi-million-dollar budget to be able to shoot on a quality anamorphic lens. And the one thing that really grinds my gears about Sony cameras is that they will not give us open gate recording. And I feel like as I'm saying that, I can already see the comments coming in of,
why do you need?
People don't need. If you want to.
And so there's always been this dilemma of, there's companies like Panasonic, there's companies like Blackmagic that are giving the people what they want and not gatekeeping behind their higher models of cameras. Blackmagic could have said, no, we're not going to give you open gate in the Pocket 6K. You need to buy the Ursa for that. You need to buy the Cine 12K for that. You need to buy the Cine 17K for that. But they're not doing that. And that's why I've always really respected Blackmagic as a brand, but there was still just always something that kept me from actually making the switch. But as we've grown and our productions have grown, I've actually really started to enjoy the form factor of something like the FX6 that I'm filming this on right now. And so me, like the whole world, we're waiting for Panasonic or for Blackmagic to create this camera. A box shape with the same innovative technology, unlocked, typically gatekept features like open gate and internal raw recording and all of that kind of stuff. And this year, Blackmagic released it. And I looked at it and I said, they missed the mark. I actually commented on a couple YouTube videos from people who are at NAB checking the Pyxis out with my disappointment. And there were three main reasons I was disappointed when I first saw the Pyxis 6K. Number one, the side screen does not flip out. To be completely honest, I rarely ever use the included LCD screen on my FX6. It's not usable for me as a shooting monitor to pull focus with. It's tiny. I can't do a lot of things on it. I can't use a lot of the tools that are built into most professional video monitors. And so I end up just not using it. The only time I really use that is if I need the touch tracking autofocus. And so using the FX6, I've learned to rely on the camera's physical buttons to adjust camera settings. And I feel like that will be probably the play that I'll take with the Pyxis as well. because it does have plenty of buttons around to adjust your settings. But honestly, for changing settings, doing this is really not a huge deal while I'm shooting. And if it's on a tripod, it's an even less of a big deal because you're already there. You can just use the side screen. Now, I do have the Pyxis monitor on order. I am very excited for that to come. However, I don't know that I'll use it all the time because I prefer a little bit bigger monitor. We just picked up this Hollyland kit and I like the fact that I don't have to rig an extra transmitter back here. It's just all up here. And so what I will probably do is primarily rely on the buttons and then just turn the camera sideways. Honestly, after shooting with it in a kind of run and gun situation where I needed to be quick, I needed to adjust things on the fly, it really wasn't a big deal. Now, what I will say is I have high hopes for the Pyxis Pro or the Pyxis G2, whatever Blackmagic decides to name it. But I think that the Pyxis G2 will, even if it's $5,000, I think it will fix a lot of the issues that people have with the Pyxis. But I think Blackmagic was smart getting the Pyxis to market, answering what the majority of people need, and getting something out there that fits what people had been asking for so long. Secondly is the lack of built-in NDs. Obviously, coming from the FX6, I am spoiled by the internal NDs. Internal NDs are wonderful. I love it. It saves so much time. It saves extra setup, extra bulk, extra money. You don't have to go buy a matte box and then a filter and all of the stuff that you need. Rail supports. I mean, there's a lot of clunkiness that comes with ND filters unless you just use a screw on. But then if you're changing lenses, it's a lot. So that was another thing I looked at. I said, man, that was a L that they didn't put internal ND filters. And then I found out that there's a couple brands that make drop-in NDs for a PL mount to L mount converter. And that really solved my problem. I bought the L mount version of this camera knowing that I would then adapt to PL. It's just more flexible than having just a PL mount that you can't swap out. You can't use other types of lenses. And so I knew I was gonna buy a PL mount. And when I learned that there's a couple brands that make these drop-in filter PL mounts, that really solved the internal ND issue for me because I was already gonna use an adapter. And now I can have an internal ND filter within the adapter. I can switch out lenses super quickly. I don't have to change out the filters. I don't have to mess with the matte box. It's all contained within the PL mount adapter. I think these things are genius. This one is the Mica. I think that's how you pronounce it. I will most likely be sending this one back. I'm actually supposed to get the Mofage Poco system tomorrow. From what I can see, it seems like it's quite a bit higher quality. Not that the mica is bad, but the wheel to adjust the ND strength is very small. It just feels a little cheap and a little bit brittle in terms of the actual filter, the wheel mechanism. It doesn't feel super robust. So I'm hoping that the Mofage Poco system is a little bit higher quality. It should be. It's quite a bit more expensive. But again, even at $400, you're basically adding an internal ND to your camera. In some ways, I actually prefer it to the internal ND on the FX6 because it's so responsive to change the strength. The last issue I had, and the reason I was kind of hesitant, was I felt like the dynamic range wasn't very good. You know, they claimed 13 stops of dynamic range, which is like, whoa, that's way less than my FX6. My FX6 has 15 plus stops. The Ursa Mini Pro has 15 plus stops. All these other cameras, everything, it seems like nowadays 13 is a low number for dynamic range. But after testing this out, shooting with bright spotlights on a football field and darks and sunset and low light, high light, really bright colored lights, which sometimes I feel like cameras can struggle with that. Real world usage, the dynamic range is fine. Again, I need to do an exact side-by-side test with the FX6, but based off of just my gut feeling after shooting with it and watching the footage, it has every bit of dynamic range as the FX6 does. And if you look at the tests from Cine, you'll actually find that the majority of camera manufacturers will inflate their dynamic range numbers by using a test that maybe isn't quite as strenuous. However, when they use their IMATEST calculations, this camera performs just as well as a lot of the other cameras that you see out there claiming 15 plus stops. The FX6 is one of those. Based on Cine, the dynamic range of the Pyxis 6K based off of the dynamic range of the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K. Now it could be actually a little bit better based on the image processing improvements and different thermal design, but we're gonna say it's the exact same as the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K. Imatest calculates 11.6 stops at an SNR of 2 and 12.9 stops at an SNR of 1. Now let's look at the FX6. The FX6, Imatest calculates 11.4 stops at an SNR of 2 and 12.6 stops at an SNR of 1. So based on Cinedy's test, the FX6 actually has less dynamic range than the Pyxis, despite being advertised at 2+ more stops. I've never had an issue with how much dynamic range I'm able to get out of the FX6. So if this is as good, I know that it's gonna be good enough for what we're doing right now. So all in all, after shooting our first commercial project on the Blackmagic Pyxis 6K, we found it has fantastic image quality and dynamic range. We found that the rolling shutter was not as big of an issue as people were making it out to be. And if it is, there's videos out there of how to fix it in post. The commercial that we shot was actually a sport-related company, and our first project that we shot with this camera was at a high school football game. It was 100% handheld. It was plenty of movement, plenty of camera shake, and I did not have to even use the gyro stabilization to fix any of those shots. They look perfectly fine. And that's in open gate and anamorphic. So I feel like people are kind of drilling, and there's like two camps of like, don't worry about the rolling shutter. And then there's like, oh my goodness, the rolling shutter is so bad. It's better than the FX9, and nobody's complained about the FX9 rolling shutter. The internal ND can easily be solved with a simple piece of kit that works in our workflow of lenses. And the camera is still a joy to operate, even with the screen being on the side. Honestly, as a Sony fanboy, quote unquote, I've had a lot of fun operating this camera. The menu system blows Sony's out of the water. One thing that absolutely blows my mind about the FX6 is when you're playing back a clip, you cannot fast forward or scrub through that clip beyond holding the joystick to the right and getting a 2x scroll through the timeline. On the Pyxis, you have a playback window with the touchscreen. You can click and drag the playhead to wherever you want. You can loop clips. You can see the entire timeline of clips cut by cut in order, just automatically. There's a lot of ways that the Blackmagic operating system blows Sony's out of the water. And I can say, as a longtime Sony user, I'm a huge fan of this camera. And I'm really thankful that there are companies out there like Blackmagic that are not gatekeeping their features behind their really expensive cameras. Honestly, if I had to think of a complaint, it would be that I wish that the I/O was recessed further on this side. The SDI ports stick out a good bit, and so if you wanted to add a battery plate, there's no really great way. Like the FX6, this is all pushed in to like here, so it's a little bit easier to plug things in and have a battery plate and a V-mount. With the Pyxis, you kind of have to like slide things out or have a swivel V-mount plate. It's not quite as nice to work with these sticking straight out of the back here. So I wish they could have recessed these in or even angled them out a little bit, so that way you could plug stuff in with a big battery back here. I personally just own a lot of V-mounts, so that's why I went the V-mount route instead of spending $200+ per BPU battery. I've already got like 10 of these, so I've already invested quite a bit into the V-mount system. So those are my initial thoughts on the Blackmagic Pyxis 6K after having used this system on a paid client commercial project. I'm super excited to dive into this camera more, to use it more, to shoot more content revolving around this camera, maybe to help you make a decision whether to get this camera or not get this camera. Definitely leave a comment if you have any feedback, if you have thoughts, if you have questions. Let me know. I would love to interact with you in the comments. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, cheers.